Hello, everybody, and welcome to Boss Talks. This is episode 85. We have a great show for you today. We are going to jump right into it. We have some great guests from WMFHA, the Washington Multifamily Housing Association. And our guests are, I'm going to get it backwards, but Ryan Makinster and Carter Nelson. Ryan is the Director of Government Affairs, and Carter is the Public Affairs Manager. They do all things politics and legislation and advocacy when it comes to the Multifamily Housing Association here in Washington. And we're going to jump in and explain the things that have been happening as of late and the wrap up of the legislative session that just took place. And also, we're going to dive into different ways you can get involved as a person, both as a person in as a citizen in the state of Washington and also a professional in the state of Washington when it comes to multifamily and property management. But I hail from Washington. I'm active in WMFHA, so I've gotten to know both Ryan and Carter and thought it would be great to have them on the show and give everybody an opportunity to learn more about involvement here locally, and then hopefully that encourages you in your local market as well, wherever you are watching from. But before we jump into that, I'm Evan Happel. I'm your host. I'm with Community Boss, and we have a great solution to help manage your physical spaces, whether that's your parking, your amenities, or mapping. We have you covered, and we can make it a better place to live for your residents, more fair, highlight the great amenities and different aspects of your community that are there, and then also generate some revenue and make it easy to manage. And we like to call it managing like a boss. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. But today it's about Ryan and Carter. Hey guys, thanks for being here.
Hey Evan, nice to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we just got off of last week of having a great time at EdCon, the biggest for WMFHA to date. We were in Seattle, a new venue. I think there was 1,900 people signed up. I don't know how many actually showed up, but it was a lot, and it was a good time. A lot of people learned a lot of things. Did you guys have sessions yourselves? I can't remember if you did or didn't.
We didn't have sessions. We participated in some and enjoyed them. We did have a special speaker we brought in for the morning for a limited breakfast. Greg Colburn, he's with the Runstad Center at the University of Washington. He actually has a book that's homelessness is a housing problem. So he kind of basically uses data to talk about the underlying issues that are driving homelessness. And it's agnostic view of it. It's not, it doesn't lean one way or the other towards solutions, but his whole viewpoint kind of is you got to look at the true underlying numbers and the data if we want to have a solution. Our assumed solutions are often based on emotion and not what we see on the street. And so he said, his whole viewpoint and his message is we need to look at what's causing homelessness to find our solution out of it. I can tell you one thing, part of that solution, everything. We have to do anything and everything right now. There's no one solution, although some elected officials and people with certain viewpoints think their solution is the best. And at WMFHA, we know, as Greg has stated, it takes a village. We all are responsible for finding the solution to this, and we all need to work together.
Yeah. And it only benefits us all because we all live somewhere. So,
and I will piggyback that EdCon East is next week. So anyone tuning in, I will be doing a presentation on grassroots and advocacy for those interested. So
awesome. Well, I'm excited for them. I know that it'll be informative and a great way for people to get involved and learn how their voice can be heard and why it matters. So that's really great you're doing that. All right, so I'd love to just ask a few questions that I normally ask, and then we'll get right into who you guys are, how you got into what you're doing, and just the fun things in politics that are going on in the state of Washington these days. So when it comes to building community, how do you, each of you, Ryan, we'll start with you, how do you go about that in your life daily?
Actually, my professional life, I think it probably aligns pretty well with my personal life. I mean, it's just getting involved. the strongest way to build community and have these conversations, especially in the realm of government affairs and advocacy, is just to get to know everybody in your industry as well as just the community. You never know where that crossover is. I've spent a lot of my time working at chambers of commerce, different philanthropies on boards for different nonprofits, and you'll be surprised. You meet someone on a board for a nonprofit that you had no connection with, or you thought you did, and realize you have something in common, or you have a common goal that's outside of why you're in that room or that boardroom together. So I think just being active in your community is not only instrumental for building that community locally, like in your daily life, but in your professional life as well. I would say you don't want to hamstring yourself by looking at a narrow focus, because you never know who that next ally will be.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more we get to know people outside of their professional realm, we can now maybe have a more commonality when it comes to talking about things that matter, like our housing.
Yeah, and if I might really quick before Carter answers that question, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's really hard, and sometimes the industry that we work in, there can be some conflict, there should be some friction. It's designed to be that way, when you do this kind of work, but it's hard to be rude to someone if you see them every day, if you see them as an ally, if you see them as a friend, or just even a colleague or an acquaintance. Contrary to the popular belief that you may see on TV, a lot of people that do what we do, you're friends with someone on the other side of the issue. And in that one day, that 1 hour in that one room, you may not be agreeing, but an hour later, you're hugging it out and having a conversation. That's truly what our profession is. It's just not recognized a lot of times in the media.
Right. That's true. Carter, how about you?
I think I'll echo a lot of what Ryan said. I think when you're in the advocacy space, and this is what we do for a living, that a lot of what we do in our personal lives are really similar. So I have a lot of friends in the industry, both elected officials and folks that are advocating for different issues. And so I feel like building community really just means being involved where you can and where you have capacity, and caring about the local jurisdictions that you're in. I live in Kirkland, and I try to go to as many things on the east side, Redmond, Kirkland, Bellevue, to really stay engaged and know what's kind of coming up in the neighborhood. And so it's really helped me both grow my personal and my professional network. So
awesome. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for answering. And then next question, when it comes to having a sense of hospitality and having somebody over and hosting them for a meal, what would you cook for someone to make them feel right at home?
Ryan,
go ahead, Ryan.
What would you pour?
Oh, you're gonna ask me to go first. Well, gosh, I love to cook. I grew up in a restaurant background, and I participated I was in that industry for a large part of my time, even though I'm not a chef. What would I do for hospitality? My favorite thing probably to make for people is chiapino. It's the fisherman's stew. It's the out of San Francisco. It's the fishermen, whatever they had left over for the day, they brought in usually a tomato base, and usually there's a little wine. It's a little glass for me, a little glass for the pot, to add flavor there. So it's actually a very social way to cook. And so I think for hospitality wise, if I had a choice of what to make for someone to kind of move forward, I think that would probably be my choice.
Nice. I don't think I've ever had that. So,
well, we can work on that, Evan. I know where you live.
All right. Cool.
And I mean, I love cooking and hosting. I generally do that with some other friends who are better cooks than me. So I like to say that I'm, like a very good sous chef to have in the kitchen. I like to help, and I'm a big wine person. So always like to be serving and trying new wines. So wine tasting is definitely on the table for any hospitality at my house.
All right. Well, thanks for answering. Yeah. So those two together is a great combo. And we'll get into it more, but I know, Ryan, you have a background in also the beer and wine industry, right? So you spent some years doing all that as well. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, I grew up in the restaurant industry. My family had German restaurants on my mother's side, and then I participated with the restaurant group here in Seattle back in the heyday of startups in the late 90s and early 2000s. So I was definitely exposed to the business side and the other side. And then I was lucky enough for a few years when I was in Alaska. I actually when I was lobbying as a contract lobbyist rather than internally like I am now as a director. And I represented the craft brewing industry and the craft distilling industry. So that was pretty fun. In addition, I was also lucky enough to represent the sport fishing industry. So, I mean, beer, distilled spirits, and salmon and halibut fishing. It was a really tough life for a few years there.
Yeah, I bet. I got to go hang out with these guys, to learn the issues. No, it's good. All right. And then final question, when it comes to your caffeinated beverage of choice here in the state of Washington / Seattle, I would think it's some kind of coffee, but maybe it's not. I will
let Carter answer this one first.
Well, I'm the hot taker on this. I'm not really a coffee person. I drink it on occasion, like a latte, but I'm an iced tea and hot tea person. I just generally, I like that. It's more refreshing to me, but, no hate to the coffee lovers out there.
Yeah, I think I'm on my third or fourth cup of coffee for the day. It's kind of a running joke with Carter and some others in my office. So, yeah, definitely coffee for me, even though I've been leaning into London fogs recently. I do like my Earl Grey tea, but, it's coffee.
Yeah. And do you have a special coffee you like to drink or just straight up?
I'm going to qualify that. So yes, coffee, basically during the weekdays, it's coffee, just straight up black coffee. Weekends, I have a ritual. I get up, take my dog. I have a Bernese Mountain Dog. We walk a few blocks down to the coffee shop and I always get a non-fat vanilla latte. Very basic.
Hey, you got to get your ritual and you know what you like. It's all good.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thanks for answering, both of you. All right, we're going to get right into it. I'd love to just take a moment and get to know each of you a little bit better so people can see who you are and know who to talk to and learn more about all that's going on in housing in the state of Washington. But Carter, I know that you're the newer of the newcomers to WMFHA. Both of you only been with us a year, little over a year. Carter, has it been a year?
It hasn't been a year. It'll be a year in July.
Okay. So we're still, we're still new, new to this space, but we're happy to have you guys. I know it's been a great impact so far, and I've learned a lot just with you guys here too about all things going on. So Carter, what's your background? How did you get into this space and where you are right now?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I've always been pretty engaged in the political space. I have my degree in political science and a minor in pre-law. Thought I would go to law school and ended up working for a congressional campaign right out of college. So started working and kind of put, additional school on the back burner because I really love being involved and doing this work, but campaigns weren't really for me. So I ended up working for a local realtors association for a few years in Sacramento, which is where I was living at the time. And, kind of combined my love of real estate and, how much I care about the housing industry and combined that with, my love for government affairs and advocacy work. So I was there for a while and really loved what I did. I think I told you, but I'll share. My family's in the industry. I grew up around parents who owned housing property and were managing them themselves. And so I would go and respond with my dad to different tenant emergencies and different things. And so I really just understood firsthand what housing providers and managers have to deal with every day. And so, my family's obviously still doing that. And I try to stay engaged just in that capacity. So when I moved back to Washington from California and this job became available, it just kind of felt like it was fate, getting to combine these two things and stay in the industry with, my family and our friends that are connected. So, that's just kind of how I got here.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. And Ryan, how about you?
Yeah, I think I took a more circuitous route. I didn't go to school for this. I actually went to school for advertising for creative.
Okay.
That's always underlying a little bit of stuff. But like I mentioned, I'm pretty fresh out of college. I was back here in Alaska or Seattle for the first .com bubble or the first .com kind of impetus where everything took off in the late 90s, early 2000s. I was a partner in a restaurant group. We had 3 restaurants here in the area. We were expanding. If you were here in Seattle that time, everything kind of shut down and stopped. The market kind of crashed, and there's a big issues there. And obviously, a lot of businesses were affected. Our restaurant group was as well. We're expanding with the hope that that boom cycle is going to go a couple more years longer to get established. But so at that point, if you were in Seattle at the time, it was kind of quiet. There was a lot going on, and I had a friend that was in Alaska, and passed my information on to a legislator. I got a phone call and said, "You're hired. I will see you in 2 months." And so I moved to Alaska sight unseen, and started out as front desk in a state representative's office. And Alaska is unique. Staffers aren't just like answering the phones. We actually carry the bills. We help draft them with our legal team and make sure they get passed. And so I worked there, went to the Senate for a few years, worked in Senate leadership. And then after that, bounced around a couple of times, did communications and events for a few associations. So that kind of leads into that's how I got into the association world with the State Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development Corporation, a couple others. Then found my way back to the legislature. When a representative calls your boss at the time and says, "I need a new chief of staff," and I heard Ryan is willing to do it, even though I did not know this. I was voluntold by my executive director that said, when a representative asks, you say yes. So I went back for a few years, and then I kind of found my way into lobbying. So I was a contract lobbyist, like I mentioned, for a number of years there. Came back here, looking to get back to my home area. I'm from Longview, Washington originally. Ended up in Vancouver representing the home building industry, single family construction mainly in the Southwest Washington area, and then Portland, the greater Portland, 6 counties for about a year and a half, 2 years. And then 2 years ago in July, I've been here at WMFHA, and I love it. This industry, everybody's so friendly. It kind of puts a smile on your face. It's a very friendly industry, and it's a very diverse industry, which is great to see. It's really fun. And I will say it's kind of a younger industry. A lot of people in positions of, especially that we deal with in government affairs, positions of decision-making positions, I would say, or those kind of things, are younger than you see in other industries. And I think that really helps us with the conversations we have at the GA level.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing your guys' background a little bit. And Ryan, are you living down there still? Do you commute a lot?
No. I moved up here. I will have to admit, I miss Seattle a lot. I didn't realize how much I missed it till I got back 2 years ago. I actually live in the Fremont area of Seattle, okay. So I'm glad to be back in the big city. Did love Portland. I grew up outside of Portland, but Seattle's my home now.
Nice. Okay. Well, thanks again for giving us a little bit of background on your guys' history and how you got to where you are. Again, thank you for being in the positions you are, because I know previously we only had one person doing all things government. I think we had a contractor as well. So having both of you has really been awesome, and having two people to get to know and being able to ask questions and interact with has been really great at all the different events. So thank you guys, both of you. All right. So we just had the Washington State Legislature wrap up its general session, and a lot of things happened. There was a lot of bills on the table that affected this industry specifically. A lot of people that were very passionate, probably on both sides. But, when it comes to where people live, the people that are renting and things tend to be even more passionate because they feel a certain way. And I totally understand that, because we all live and we all rent or own or whatever housing. So it is something that we all actually have in common. What happened in this last session, and what were the highlights of what was on the table, and what were the outcomes of them?
Yeah, Evan, if I might, I can kind of answer that, and I think Carter can fill some of this in. Carter, just to preface this, Carter has a pretty strong focus on a lot of our local effort and local initiatives, while I kind of manage the more higher level policy as well as the state. So I've been a little bit more engaged in this. Even having said that, she's engaged in everything as well. But there are a number of issues, and let me set the groundwork so people understand. Since, we didn't join you last year. Last year, we have a legislature that has 2 sessions, right? 2 years. We have a long session, a short session. This was a short session. Last year, they called it the Year of Housing. It was really focused on supply, middle housing legislation, new zoning, density requirements, opportunities for more ADU development. A lot of things that traditionally don't touch multifamily, at least the multifamily that we represent. At WMFHA, we represent usually larger properties that have property management involved with their daily operations. And so those are usually single family townhouses with all the stuff we saw last year, but they were all priorities for us. As we mentioned earlier in this conversation, it's all hands on deck, right? We need to support everything to get this housing issue dealt with here in our state. There's a number of states that are experiencing this. Traditionally, it's been the coast, the coast, the East and West Coast states that have had problems with housing issues. It's ubiquitous now. Even the traditional states that have usually had fairly affordable housing and not really issues with lack of housing, like Arizona and some of the states in the Southwest, they're experiencing problems now too. So it's not exclusively the coast states anymore. But this year it was a little bit of a different focus. It was a short session, 60 days. We did find out that this short session, traditionally, they mostly do budget and a few policy things, but it's not policy heavy, right? Because they've got a limited time to do their work. This year, they had the most bills, we call it dropped, most bills basically filed for hearings of any session, long or short sessions. So that was obviously an issue. We recently had a pro-session webinar a couple hours ago. We had 4 legislators join us, 2 senators, 2 representatives, and they even pointed out the fact that there was so much policy, it really made it difficult for them to focus on too much because there was just so much in front of them. I will say a couple things. Specifically, there was one thing that was a big issue for us. It's an issue every year. It was called rent stabilization. There are 2 bills, a Senate bill and a House bill that address that. It's basically, depends on how you look at it. I think it's semantics. It is rent control. By any economist's definition, it was rent control. It would have limited rent. Originally, it was at 3%, went up to 7%. There's some movement around that, and it also included a couple other tenant protections. And to your point, and it's well taken. Depending on what part of the this market you're in, you may have some concerns. You may feel certain ways about this type of legislation. I will point out, I'm a renter. I know what it likes to rent. I've rented most of my life, just because kind of just the transient nature of working in a state capital, then moving back and forth between where your home is. Yeah, I get it. I'm a renter. So this is coming from a point of view of renter, but also it's coming from a point of view of someone that listens to the numbers and looks at the data that's provided. It's like they say 4 out of 5 dentists agree. Well, 98 out of 100 economists agree rent control and rent stabilization does not work. It has never worked. We actually have a great case right now in St. Paul, Minnesota, where they passed something really similar and basically development stopped. If you look at their permits for multifamily construction, it went off a cliff and they stopped producing. While Minneapolis, this Twin City, which is right next door, they share a boundary line, is going right now, doesn't have a housing affordability problem, and they're building tens of thousands of units right now. And so that is our big issue right now. It will be back next year. We view it as a single ideological solution to a problem that requires, like I said, all hands on deck. We need supply. Greg Colborn, who spoke to our group, like I mentioned earlier, has said homelessness is a housing issue. And by that, he means it's a supply issue. We hear a lot of times if, there's a lot of money spent, billions of dollars spent, whether it's locally or at the state here in Washington to address homelessness. But he has pointed out, which I think is a valid criticism, we've done a lot for homelessness. We've dropped a lot of money in it, and we've had success. It just doesn't look like success because when you don't have enough housing, it doesn't matter how many people you get housed if you have more people falling out of housing than you're currently housing, which is the nature if you have a supply issue. That's why the year of housing last year was important. But we do know, according to the Department of Commerce here in Washington State, we need 1 million units over the next 20 years. 1 million units. And we can't do that with just ADUs or townhouses. And we can't do that with single family construction due to the zoning laws and the Growth Management Act we have that defines where we can and can't build. We need multifamily units, and we need high-rise multifamily units, which are only created through new construction. So that is our concern with rent control. It's expensive to build buildings, even more so in the last 2 years with what we're looking at interest rates and product costs to build those units. And so if there is any downward pressure, basically that says we can't pencil, right? There's not the upside for taking that substantial financial risk. Those units will not get built, and we are going to go backwards. Currently, we are already going backwards. We're building tens of thousands of units than we need right now that we're growing every year. We're going backwards. That 1 million number I just mentioned goes up every year until we address our supply issue. And so that's our biggest issue with that bill in of itself, not to mention the other policy fact that we have. If it was truly designed to stay at a certain level that it was manageable and still allows properties to pencil when they're construction or development, that's a conversation I think some people will be willing to have in the industry. However, we have a perfect example to our neighbors to the south in Oregon. They had a reasonable bill. It was 7% plus CPI. So that way it traveled, right? As we're seeing higher cost of living and interest rates right now. But after that was put into place, just 2 years later, that was a compromise made by my counterparts in Oregon, along with tenant advocates and others. They lowered it substantially. They cut it in half. And so that is a concern for our industry as well. You know, is there a number that we could live with? I don't know what that is, but we can't live with with uncertainty. And as you know, as a business owner, certainty is almost a mandate if you want to be successful in business. And so that's our biggest issue with that one bill. And I think that's kind of our overall biggest issue we deal with regularly. But Carter could probably talk to some others. Carter, if you wanted to mention the pet bill, or I think the credit reporting, some of the stuff that she focused on as well.
Yeah, I mean, like Ryan said, we get a lot of ideas that comes through the legislature, and oftentimes, you know, those ideas are coming from people who aren't in the housing industry and don't understand the impacts and effects of what will really happen when that legislation gets passed. And so, you know, we did see the pet deposit proposal and bill that was going to limit pet rent and pet deposits. And so, you know, we have to bring facts to the table. And luckily we had some really great suppliers. Katie from One Up Floors really came through with some hard data that really helped legislators see, oh, wait, you know, we can't move forward with this until we have some really robust conversation around what this will look like. Even if other states have tried it, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right thing to do, and that it's really helping the people that they're trying to help. In fact, it will just prevent housing providers from wanting to take residents with pets. And that's, you know, obviously not a consequence that people want to face. And so sometimes it's just working and trying to help people understand that, like, you know, it's almost like you're looking for a problem to solve instead of working together and trying to help we want to help the same people. We just have a totally different idea of how to get there. So.
Yeah. And to both of your points, like, there does need to be an understanding, like, as a person that needs housing, whether I'm renting or owning or whatever it is, I need to be a good renter and I need to take care of my space. Well, you know what? Not everybody does. And that means somebody has to clean up afterwards, right? So, like, in the sense of like a pet situation, if you weren't a good pet owner and a good tenant and you destroyed the place and left, well, somebody's got to clean that up. And if they can't clean it up and cover that cost, that means it eats into their ability to operate, right? So they can't just keep doing that. It doesn't make business sense. So there needs to be an understanding from all sides that, like, some people tend to mess things up for everyone. Like, and yeah, it's an unfortunate thing, but at the end of the day, it is a reality, and we have to figure out a way to all do this together.
Yeah, and I think, Evan, you really hit the nail on the head with that. Most tenants are great. And most housing providers are great, right? I believe that across the board from what we see. As we deal with our issues in Olympia or even at the local level, unfortunately, there's a few bad actors or a few bad situations that are always pulled out, but they're anecdotal. The numbers do not align with that. You may have some bad, very large rent increases, some pet problems on either side, but the data doesn't show those aren't overwhelming. The outliers are being used to make public policy, which isn't the best way to do that. But to your point about the let's say bad actors, whether it's like I'm pointing out, there are bad actors in our industry and they make it hard for us, our good actors, to do their job. Well, the same is for pets or the situation you outlined. But unfortunately, and we make this point all the time, if we want to protect those certain individuals that may not clean up their pet, or not even through fault of their own, right? Stuff happens. My dog is actually looking at me right now, staring at me funny. Stuff happens. It's not maybe their fault, but it's their responsibility. But if we do not recognize that and charge appropriate mitigations, whether it's for liability or for damage repair, that gets shared by every other tenant, whether they are a good tenant or not. And I think that's something that we always have to kind of can bring back to the forefront. A lot of the issues we deal with, you're basically, there seems to be in legislatively or policy wise, especially if there's people that believe in one issue policies, is they want to protect everybody, but truly what they're doing is they're putting the burden of bad actors on all the good residents, which are the majority of them. And that's who's assuming the cost, not the state, not the community, and sometimes not even the property owners or the managers. It's the other tenants that are dealing with that, which we're also seeing with our eviction and unlawful detainer issues in the state as well.
Yeah. So yeah, if you have no ability to get, cover your risk through like a deposit, and there again, that's going to be another thing that drives rent up. It's just like when you go to the grocery store and some people steal. What happens? The rest of the groceries go up in price, right? Like it's not like oh well. Like these things have to be covered somehow, and that's exactly the same thing in these cases. But if you're a good pet owner, you get your money back. So like like you didn't destroy the unit, then you're good to go.
Yeah, and one thing that kind of gets lost in the shuffle sometimes too, Evan, is we've got a number, whether it's the state level or local level, a number of other restrictions on what we can charge. Many jurisdictions now, you can only charge all in for when you move in 1 month's rent, for damage deposit, last month's rent, any other things that you have to charge for. If you're doing a pass-through for utilities and there's a deposit that's required by the utilities, although it's a pass-through, you cannot charge more than 1 month's rent for all of those things combined at move-in in a number of our communities. So if you imagine that on top of being not allowed for pet deposits or pet rent, or some communities consider pet deposit part of that same group, imagine if you have someone move out, which we've had a lot of recently, move out 2 months early, and they happen to have damage, unfortunately. You basically, the only money you have in your hand is 1 month. So you're out 1 month's rent plus the $3,000 of damage that you have to repair. And like I said, ultimately that gets spread across the other units. And so is it the commonplace that happens? Not at all. But we need to recognize it does happen. It's not the responsibility of our other residents. And maybe not even the residents currently, right? Maybe we aren't going to raise rent that much, or maybe we don't because we're prohibited by certain notification requirements. However, the next family that moves into that area, or the next person, or the college graduate that's graduating, that the next person to move into that unit is going to pay a higher amount because of the actions of someone before them.
Yeah. And I would, being somebody that has seen a lot of people and how they live, there's a lot more people than we realize that don't live very clean. And I think most property managers would say the same thing. That you'd be very surprised how people are willing to live. I just don't understand personally, but it is a common thing. But I want to actually get back to the rent control issue itself, because I think that it's important to point out that there is short-term positives for renters, but it ends up being a compounded negative in the long run. So what is it that you would maybe short-term see a positive for yourself as a renter, and then like what's the future effect?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Evan. And to have a conversation, we ask for this all the time. Let's have a robust but a full conversation. So yeah, we will admit there are short term. If you are in a rental unit and let's say you're limited to 3%, that's good for you overall, right? You don't have to worry about that a large rent increase or what even a rent increase. I mean, I can tell you, ask any person, do you want to pay more for your coffee down the street? No. Do you want to pay more for rent? No. It's an easy answer. However, there are some repercussions. The number one repercussion is if there's not any upside reward, with the recognition that there are downsides too. Markets do not always go up. Right now, rent is going down because of the market. If there's no upside with all the downside risk, especially with the pricing, right? Like I mentioned, building these high rises, there's not someone coming in with a check saying, I'm going to spend, $500 million or more to build a building. That's got to be sold on the street, we call it. It's got to be financed. And
Right.
those people look at numbers different. Doesn't matter how much they want to help. They don't look at that. They look at those numbers. And if there's no upside to the risks that they're going to take with that substantial investment, they're not going to build. So number one, supply. Long term, it hurts supply. It's been proven by, like I said, 98 out of 100 economists believe it hurts supply.
Well,
there are other
they
issues.
go and they take their money somewhere else at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly.
Money is
something somewhere else.
Money's fluid. It can go somewhere else. They're going to go where they get the best return on their investment, or sometimes it's not always the best return, but it's the easiest return. Regulations, which are outside of rent control, but just general, how hard it is to build. You may have a better return on investment here than you do in another state. But if it takes you 5 years to get your permits to build a building, which all that hard money we call upfront money is hard money, it's a higher lending rate. Your interest is higher. You got to sit on that for 5 years before you start seeing a return on your investment, opposed to a different state in the Southwest where you can start seeing returns in 2 years. That's something that goes in calculation as well. And rent control is part of that, right? We can't sit here and say rent control is exclusively the problem in this conversation. There are other issues too, but you have to take them all together that do it. But like I say, if you have a couple of problems like we do in Washington State, it's difficult to build here. We're a highly regulated state, but then you put rent control on top of that, you're just making it even harder to build and less likely to develop. But get back to less esoteric and let's talk about individuals, people that are renters. If you're in the unit now, it works for you. It makes sense. If you move out, as people move out, the other rents, somewhere the rent is going to have to go up to cover that loss of income on those units that are currently being controlled. That's one of the issues. The other issue is without new supply coming online, which we already know is a problem with these types of proposals, and the demand going up. When people move out, those new units are going to be higher priced. So the people at the lower end of the market are going to have even less opportunity, because if they're not in a unit for whatever reason right now, or they have to move, or they're coming from out of state, or they're graduating from college or graduating from high school, they're moving into a unit that's not rent controlled right now because it's a new unit to them. They're going to have to pay substantially higher, and they definitely cannot afford it. In addition, we've seen in New York and other states with rent control, people stay in their units. You can have a unit. Yes, you can have it. Well, I think it was it Mayor Koch in New York kept a rent control unit that was like at $800 for 20 years. Obviously, Mayor Koch did not need that back in the day. There's been others that have done that. That's just the famous example. But just with that, and generally, there are people that stay in them. And this happens in the single family construction side too. When you have real estate is elastic market. It's supposed to be an elastic market to work. But if it's inelastic, you don't have people that can't afford to moving up, opening up lower priced options for people that are farther down the economic ladder, especially around middle housing or middle rental housing. That occurs as well. Or you don't have people moving down. If you have people that can come into a different unit, then someone else moves in their unit, you have movement up and down. But with no movement in the middle and the top end, people start falling out the bottom end, and that's how you see homelessness. It ultimately is a supply issue. It truly is. In our state, we need supply. We need 1 million units, but that is a long-term solution that we need to address. Rent control is a short-term answer that will only make the problem worse in the long term. It's just somewhat difficult for elected officials to admit that we have a long-term problem created by 20 years of regulatory and statutory decisions made by their predecessors, not them, that got us here. And it's going to take a long term to get out of it. But that's not what they want to sell when you're running for office every 2 years. You're trying to look for a short-term solution. But truly, I don't believe the short-term solution is going to be helpful. Like you mentioned and pointed out, it will be helpful for a certain number of people, and pretty much probably a lot of people around right now. It will be helpful for them. It will not house new people. It will not. The only way to do that was the supply, which rent control will harm.
Yeah. Well, and if anybody wants like a peek into like places like New York, there's actually some Instagram accounts that are pretty interesting. This guy goes around New York just asking people how much they pay in rent. and then goes on a tour of their unit. Maybe you've seen this. It's actually pretty funny to me, like, because there's certain people they're paying a moderate amount and they have this giant apartment, and then this other person, they're paying $600 and it's like, I think it's like 100 square feet, and they're a stacked. They crawl into this layer above loft bed where there's like 5 inches to put your head and your body. And anyways, so yeah, if we want that, go watch that. If that's what we want, then I guess that's what we'll get.
Right.
Because that's kind of the result, right? Like, you have these wildly crazy differences in what certain people pay and other people pay, and then size of unit and even quality of unit. So it gets all over the place. But yeah, it's interesting. So go check that out, and maybe I'll share it in the comments, because it is an interesting take on like what rent control does and what it could be for you if we did it here. All right. Well, I think that, is there anything else that was an important thing that was covered during this session?
Well, we had a couple other things. There were some more supply issues. One of the big ones for us is transit-oriented development. It's kind of a movement that's been going on for probably over a decade, to build density around transit for good reason, right? We want a lot of people that use mass transit sometimes don't have a car, probably don't have the ability to pay as much for living space. That's, or they just choose not to. And so the best place to place some of these multifamily units, higher density, is around transit within walking distance. And we support that fully. And it's in how our current zoning is set up, even though there's some efforts for Mayor Harold here in Seattle just released a new plan for their comp plan to address some of those issues for density, to create more density, to create the housing we want. A lot of communities right now, that's the first solution they're looking at, is building around transit for multifamily where we need density. And that's great. There's a bill that we supported last year as a House and Senate bill that we supported for transit-oriented development. Unfortunately, some of the advocates and some of those looking to help the affordable housing sector, or those with a lower AMI, basically affordability, added some things to it that just would have broke the system. They had requirements that would have been involved, the inclusionary zoning for how much affordable housing and at what portion of affordable, right? How low on that affordability scale has to be. We really worried, talking to our developers, weren't going to pencil out. So they weren't going to get developed. So not only were they not going to get developed, we were very worried that if this went through, even though we supported it last year, if this went through this year with those changes, people might kind of wipe their hands and go, yep, we're done. We fixed transit-oriented development, with us knowing that we're not going to get anything built, which would be worse than waiting a year to continue having a conversation about this and get those units built.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, greater supply helps it all. So if we have more options, there's more competition, and there's just more ability to get more people in housing. So that's probably one of the biggest important pieces, I would say. And so we got to have an environment where people want to build, and the cost of building can't be so crazy that they have to have rent be really high.
Yeah, I think, Evan, you nailed that one too. We just spoke with the person that does development and ownership and property management. They're one of the all-in-one larger companies in the country, and we saw tens of thousands of units going up around Seattle and stuff over the last few years because the price was high enough to justify. I'll be honest, rent was high enough to justify the pricing it takes to build a building. Those are being finished now, and there's a quarterly presentation by CoStar, and then also by the comments of the vice president of this company said that stock is going to be gone. It's going to be fully assumed in the next 8 months. And there is nothing in the pipeline right now without rent control, without even having rent control or some of these other issues, just the specter of them coming into place and the volatility in the regulatory environment of Washington State and our cities. There's not stuff in the pipeline right now. So we're already seeing the effects of these proposals that are not even law yet.
Yeah. I mean, there was quite a few years where it was Crane City, man. like cranes were everywhere, and I just don't think that's true anymore. We kind of ran out of space too, but without wrecking some building and starting over, I don't know if there's that much space in Seattle anymore. South Lake Union was this barren land of abandoned buildings and stuff, and it turned into, you know, housing and office buildings and all this stuff. But that's kind of over. I don't know that we have much more space in Seattle proper, unless we, again, you know, rezone certain residential areas or something.
Yes, and there's an effort. You know, the Mayor Harrell's working on that. The City Council, he has a supportive City Council of having some of these conversations now. So at least in the, you know, Seattle proper, those conversations are happening. But with the Growth Management Act and the boundaries that we draw around our cities and our counties about where you can and can't develop, we don't have any choice. We have to go vertical. We just need the recognition of local city government and the state that it's going to take effort and most likely some type of incentive and money to do that.
Yep. Yeah. And I know it is always very difficult for people that live in neighborhoods to want to embrace like an apartment community or a mid-rise or a certain like higher rise type building because they're not used to it. And they're like, no, thanks. The NIMBYs, right? The not in my backyards. Yes.
Yep.
That's a whole nother topic. So when it comes to how you guys are putting forth effort as an association and all of us as members, there's a few things that you're doing when it comes to raising funds to help that effort. One of which is the WMFHA PAC. And the other one is what's it called?
The Better Government Fund.
Better Government Fund. All right. So if you could unpack those simplistically as to what each of them are and like why they're important, that would be awesome.
Well, I can speak to the WMFHA PAC. So a PAC is a political action committee. It's basically a funding mechanism for us to be able to support candidates and build relationships. And kind of what we talk about is access, credibility, and success. And so those PAC dollars not only open the door to those relationships with legislators, both local, state, federal, when we work together with NAA, but also allows us to hold those legislators accountable when we have conversations with them, share how things are going to affect the industry. It is allowed, like today, we had 4 amazing legislators on our post-session wrap-up that have, you know, understood the real numbers that we bring to them and act accordingly at the dais and vote either in favor or in opposition of things, you know, partially because of the information that we share with them. And so those PAC dollars also just really give us credibility as an association that we're representing those affected by this legislation and experts in the field. And so it's just kind of this great way to get involved. And another thing that I always say is when we have a lot of members participate in the PAC, it allows us to say, look, these dollars are coming from all of our membership, and we're representing, you know, all of these properties in Washington, all of these management companies and suppliers, and, you know, here's who this legislation is affecting. And so really it's all about relationship building. And for, you know, with politics, money plays a really big role in that. But yeah, it just allows us to have a seat at the table, because if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, as they say. So that's kind of the overview of what the PAC does, and Ryan can kind of speak to that and the Better Government Fund and what makes them different.
Yeah, and to follow on with Carter real quick before the Better Government Fund, we support those that support us and support our industry, and not necessarily. I could tell you most of the people that we've supported in the past, there's a bill every year that we do not agree with them on, one of them, whatever that may be across the board. There's always that, because we don't pick by ideology. We don't pick ideologically. We don't pick by party. These are nonpartisan. We've supported people on both sides of the aisle, I'd say probably pretty evenly since I've been here, and I know my predecessor did as well. And so it's nonpartisan. For example, the webinar we just had that we hosted for legislators, we had 2 senators and 2 representatives, 1 senator from each party and 1 representative from each party. And so that's kind of what we do. And some people just aren't used to that, but we support those that support the industry, or are at least willing to give us the time of day. That's all we ask. I can't ask for you to vote a certain way, but I can ask for a meeting to have a conversation with you, at least give me the benefit of the doubt up front, and then we can talk about it. And I don't expect you to vote with us. I do, and I will say, when we support candidates, we do expect at least the courtesy of a conversation. And so that's kind of what we do with the WMFHA PAC. In addition, although a majority of what we focus on is actually helping people get elected, specific officials, if there's need be, we will support or oppose initiatives as well. That happens sometimes, just not as regularly. Traditionally, we've always done a lot of work in the PAC supporting state candidates. However, with the change of effort to a lot of local laws now regarding our industry and tighter regulation at the local level, we also participate at the city and county council level now as well. In key jurisdictions, as a statewide agency, we can't be in everywhere all the time, and so we pick those battles as they arise. The Better Government Fund's a little different, but I kind of put it out there. It basically exists to help support, whether it's like maybe some research we do without that. We use that to pay for some economic research, like an economic impact study of the industry, employment levels, those kind of things. Or more often, maybe to participate, whether directly through an amicus brief or indirectly through someone else's actions to support some legal action, whether that is a case or something we're involved in, or supporting a case that someone else has filed. That's what the Better Government Fund does. And so that's an important aspect of what we do as well, to support and protect the industry. Some entities cannot give to PACs. Basically, public and traded companies. Others, they cannot support PACs. They're prohibited to by the regulatory regime they're under. Obviously, banks, others like that. Public utilities cannot do that either. And so this is a way for them to support the industry, but that doesn't have the advocacy and the political liability that they just can't participate because of the regulations around them. In addition, there are a number of members or companies that choose not to participate in the PAC because they've got internal reasons not to, or for example, let's say law firms traditionally do not participate in PACs because they don't know who their clients are going to be in 10 years. And so they just traditionally don't do that. Although we have a number of lawyers and law firms as our members, oftentimes they will support the Better Government Fund, knowing it's going to achieve some of the same purposes, but it's not direct political action.
Nice. Yeah. So it's important to know the distinction. And I know as a member of the supplier committee, we've been talking a lot about this. Like, you may be a supplier member, and your company didn't contribute when became a member to the PAC for a lot of the reasons why you just stated, Ryan, whether you're foreign owned or you're publicly traded utility or whatever, all the different reasons. Or just ideology, who knows? It could be a lot of things. But there is the Better Business. Wait, how does it say it?
Better Government Fund.
Better Government Fund.
Just say BGF.
BGF as an option. And I think it's good to point out that sometimes I think as suppliers, we don't see it as important to support the industry in that way. We're just like, oh, we're here and we'll do what we do for you because that's what we do as a business or whatever. But it all kind of rolls downhill. Like, whatever affects housing then affects their pool of money that they can hire a supplier, right? So if we don't support what supports the industry, that could then in the future or even immediately affect us and what is available from a fund standpoint.
Yeah, and I think a prime example is the 1 million units we need. If we can affect change at the advocacy level to get those 1 million units built in the next 20 years, that's 1 million units worth of customer base for suppliers, right? And so, or the opposite is true too. We hate to say it, but if some of these ideas go into effect, we're going to lose housing. And feasibly, there are, that's loss of customers or clients for the suppliers to work with. And it's just a reality that's sad. And we saw this when the .com bubble burst the first time when I lived here. A lot of ancillary businesses went out because they were supporting the main industries that were driving our economy here. And without that main underlying economy, suppliers took a hit too, and I don't think they necessarily realized that was going to happen, but that's just the nature of it. You need the customers, just like we need our residents to want to live in our buildings. If we had just the same way, if we had a mass exodus of residents for whatever that reason may be, maybe jobs are somewhere else or something else, we would be in the same position. And so a healthy multifamily industry or housing industry in general supports our suppliers so much. And this has been recognized at the federal level as well with NAA. I mean, the Suppliers Council at the federal level, they give 40% of the money that's raised for the PAC at the federal level. It comes from suppliers. And that number, I believe, is 1.2 million. Well, the total amount is 1.28 million. So suppliers raised 500,000 this last year for NAA at the national level. And so suppliers really do come up big. It's sometimes it's our obligation to make that education known.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously federal politics are important, but state politics and local politics can be even more important. And we can have the most impact because we actually can see locally eye to eye with people. And, we're right here. We all live here. So we all jointly want to have a better environment to live and work. I would say. I think also when it comes to being a supplier, it's just important that we are also involved and understand our industry. So get involved in committees and all the things. I have been for quite a while, and it's been very important for me just to meet people, but also to understand the industry that we work alongside. So if you're not involved in any way, but you are a member of WMFHA, it's a great first step. Get involved in a bigger way by getting into committees and other things. All right. And then finally, involvement. Hey, great segue. When it comes to political stuff, a lot of people, especially if you're, say, a supplier or a person that works on site as a community manager or a leasing agent or a maintenance tech or anything, right? We tend to think those things, those politics, those things that are happening aren't our business. Like, I don't understand it. I don't want to get involved. I just don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Well, I think that's because we don't realize that it affects us too. Like, yes, maybe you don't own a building, but you are working in one owned by someone. And jobs and all these things are also affected. So if you want to speak to how we can get involved and why we could get involved beyond what I just stated, I guess, that'd be great.
I will make a quick pitch why you should get involved, and then Carter can, I think, give you the rundown on how you get involved. Some people don't understand it sometimes, but I can tell you our day on the Hill, a lot of people have changed their mind. Elected officials, they're you and me. We have a citizen legislature. They go to the grocery store. Most of them have jobs outside the legislature. And so they're just like one of us. But I will say, I've been doing this for 20 years. I can tell you, if you're an on-site person, you show up to Olympia with overalls with paint on them and mud on your boots. Whatever you say, you have the floor with a legislator. Rather than me that shows up with a blazer on or a tie. If you have work boots on and you show up in those offices, you're commanding that room. I guarantee it. I was a staffer for years. I worked for elected officials, and I felt the same way as a staffer when I took meetings from my boss. You come in, you're taking time out of your day. You're not paid to do this, which I will admit I am. It's so impactful. It's very impactful. So please just get involved, especially if you don't think you have that voice. I guarantee you do.
Well, and to your point, we had a good showing this year when it came to Day on the Hill, and we even had some people from the East Side, Spokane area, and other parts that showed up as well. And I heard directly from Libby, who is one of our people that is participating in the Carrie Anderson leadership
Emerging Leaders
program. She's a part of that, and she heard directly from the people in Washington that they were both surprised but also impressed or were happy to see that she was there, and that as a person from Spokane, especially a person that works directly in the industry, not like an owner or whatever, is a person that's a community manager, hearing from her was a big deal.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I'd like to kind of continue. I think people forget too, local. local participation and engagement. Obviously, responding to our emails is great, but really what we'd like to see is having our members, build those relationships with their local elected officials and city staff, and attend things where in their neighborhoods so they know what's going on. I mean, we're a statewide association. We try to be plugged in everywhere across the state, but really how we hear about issues and stay engaged ourselves too is hearing directly from our members. Like right now we have this TDM plan in Bellevue, so Transportation Demand Management Plan, and the city reached out to us, and so we're going to bring in some of our on-site property managers to hopefully provide feedback to the city, and so that again it's part of this is going to affect us when it's in place. We need people who can provide that feedback, who are living this every day, to share that with people so that we don't end up with plans that are really going to hurt operations. So it's just really like responding to us, or just keeping your ear to the ground on what's going on in your neighborhood.
Absolutely. Yeah. And let's not discount those emails that you guys have been sending out, because it is not only is it effective, but it is also pretty quick. I didn't even know that you could testify virtually by just going to a web page that's a part of our state government. They put it together. You just go there, respond to a bill, yay or nay, give your comments if you want to. You can say, hey, I want my local representative to see this, and even respond. Now, I did that, and my response was kind of lame, I will say. But I did participate. I did say nay, I believe, to whatever it is that I remember doing, because I truly felt that way. I did. But at the end of the day, the information provided and the way you guys made it easy to connect, it was really great. And I don't know how much participation we had. I don't know if you have analytics on that this last year, but I hope that only grows, because it's an easy way to participate.
It has grown year over year. For some issues, for the rent control issue, I think it wasn't just us, it was our allies and stuff too, but I think we had 700 responses, 800 responses just on our side of the issue. So yeah, it does work, and it's grown substantially over the last couple of years, and it continues to grow. And I think, Evan, opportunities like for us like this, and suppliers getting involved, and others just allowing us the opportunity to have a real just dialogue. I think it just grows that participation, which is very important to us.
Absolutely. Well, it's the top of the hour. I think we nailed it. Pretty sure we hit all the topics and covered them quite well. So great job, you two. And thank you so much for being here, for contributing this topic, because although it is an avoided topic, I think it's an important topic, and it is time for us to care about it, because we're overdue. We need more housing. We need to fix this problem, and it only helps if we, like you said, if we all come together and come up with solutions and not just yell at each other.
But we appreciate you. Thanks, Evan.
Absolutely. All right. So thanks for watching, everybody that participated in the audience. I appreciate you. This has been Boss Talks 85. If you want to be a guest on Boss Talks, you can. I am an open platform. I love to have people from all parts of the industry on this platform. So whether you're a leasing professional or a maintenance tech or a regional or VP or CEO, whether you're on the property management side or you're a supplier, I want to hear from you, and I want to know what makes you tick, why you're passionate about what you do, and what you want to share with others. So drop a line in my LinkedIn or email me or whatever you want to do to get a hold of me. I would love to speak to you further. But again, this has been Boss Talks. Next week, I am not going to be on. It's spring break. So deuces to everybody. But I will see you the following week, and we'll get right back to it on episode 86. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.